Welcome to REM Reward, the podcast that explores the secrets of sleep and psychology. I'm your host, Ryan, and in each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of sleep and other topics such as mental well-being and personal growth. If you want to unlock your full potential and receive the rewards that come with understanding the power of sleep, you're in the right place. To discover more tips and insights on improving your sleep and overall well-being, visit our website and explore our other episodes at remreward.org. Today we are joined with Dr. Meeta Singh, a board-certified physician, psychiatrist, and sleep specialist who has worked with elite athletes and executives to optimize performance through sleep science. In this episode, we discuss how sleep impacts mental and physical performance, strategies for high-pressure careers, managing travel disruptions, sleep's role in injury recovery, and common misconceptions, plus advice for aspiring sleep coaches. This is a really great episode. Make sure to check out all links in the description, and hope you enjoy. My first question, can you just share your journey and how you became so, passionate about sleep optimization for peak performance? And did your dual background in medicine and psychiatry influence your approach?
So I am a board certified psychiatrist and a sleep medicine specialist. I did my training many, many years ago. So way before you were born. I did a residency in psychiatry, and then I came to Henry Ford, where I did a sleep medicine fellowship. And then I want to say about 10 years ago, I actually started work in professional sports. So I worked with the local NFL team, the Detroit Lions, and talked about why sleep is important for performance. And since then I've had sort of a unique journey. I do a lot of work with professional athletes and professional teams in all the 4 major leagues, and work with C-suite executives, and with the thought of how to optimize sleep so that it can optimize performance. But yeah, I mean, sleep is really interesting, as you can tell, right? Like there's
Sure.
so much we know, and then there's still so much we don't know. There's almost a mysteriousness associated with it.
Yeah.
So what to love, you know?
Yeah. That's amazing
And
to hear. Yeah. And I guess, as you mentioned, from what you do know or what is known out there and what you've seen, how does sleep impact, both mental and physical performance, especially in, these sports or high pressure environments, maybe in sports or maybe even other areas like business or something?
well, and also, Ryan, I mean, even I would say that even being a teenager right now is a high stress environment, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
have 2 teenagers, 2 seniors in high school, and a daughter who's in college, and you have competing demands on you, right? You have to like manage your schoolwork, you have to manage your sports or after school activities, and so how do you fit sleep into it?
Hmm.
So I think that the question was how sleep affects performance. And I think if you think about sleep happening deep in your brain, well, every function of the brain gets affected if you get less sleep, right? So all the things that are important to teenagers, like memory consolidation, if you learn something new, your brain hits the save button while you're sleeping. Emotional intelligence, so the ability to first identify your own emotions and then manage those emotions. That's a function of a well-rested brain. Creativity, which is putting new information together with previously stored information, coming up with novel solutions, is a function of a well-rested brain. For teenagers, managing their time, so time management and task management, and good judgment, good decision making, those are all functions of a well-rested brain. But
Hmm.
it's not, even though sleep happens only in the brain, in fact, in every organ in your body rests and recovers for the next day while you're sleeping. So for athletes, muscle recovery happens while you're sleeping. So that was a
Right.
long-winded answer, but really, don't think of it only as happening in the brain. Think of it happening, affecting every part of your body.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting to hear. Um, and then I guess as you said again, even for I guess yeah, high schoolers like me or everyone who's listening out there, these are very high pressure environments. So for those people who are kind of like in high pressure environments, or even for people who are in high performance careers in general, like who struggle to find time for proper rest, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think that the first thing way, the first thing you want to change is how people approach sleep, which is
Hmm.
why we're doing this podcast, right? Like
Right.
you're recording this podcast because you want to educate people about the importance of sleep.
Exactly.
And it's and when you're in a high pressure situation, or when you have all these competing demands, it's easy to think about, like, to push sleep to the background and say, well, I have no time to do that. So maybe something as simple as changing your perspective on things can help. And
Hmm.
so I encourage people and athletes to think about sleep as not as a time sink, but more as a performance enhancer.
Hmm.
So how would if you were thinking about peak performance, you would strategize and make time for things like your training, your nutrition. Like if you wanted to do well in school, you would make time for paying attention at school and then doing
Right.
homework, right? Because that's what. So similarly, you would make time for sleep. You'd make sure that you protected your bedtime and got to bed on time. And then we can also discuss what you can do doing the things that you would do getting closer to sleep. Like you would learn, or you would try to make sure you put your phone away, right?
Right.
You would
Yeah.
get off electronics. You would have a good winding down routine so that you would allow sleep to happen.
Yeah, those are definitely all very important factors a lot of people preach about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I have like a personal question. I think a lot of
Yeah.
other, teenagers commonly like think this. So you hear like, online, there's a lot of professionals or business leaders who preach, not getting like I slept 3 hours and that's why I'm so successful. I sleep so little. Are they just wired differently, or what's the difference between, the common person like me and them?
I think that I think it's a misconception.
Yeah.
And I think it's a deeply flawed way to look at biology. I mean, for every person who's out there saying that, there are examples of people like Jeff Bezos or LeBron James, or top Tom Brady, or top athletes who have prioritized sleep, and as a result have had a longer than normal career because
Hmm.
they've been able to stay healthy and injury free, and they've been able to play longer. Right. So it really is a misconception. Now, I have to tell you that there is this unique and a very, very rare disorder. It's a genetic mutation that that makes people consume less sleep. So they sleep less, but nonetheless they're refreshed the next day. But it's
Hmm.
very, very rare. And it's so most people don't have that. So most people, what they do is they just on a chronic basis get less sleep. So they sleep deprive themselves. It's
Right.
all and and then what happens if you do this on a regular basis, right? And that becomes your baseline. And so people because they don't have anything to compare with, they think that is the level of alertness that they feel, and that's where they're at. And in fact, oftentimes when they get more sleep, so when even do they when they get more sleep, they actually notice a significant improvement in their alertness, and then they can look back and say, well, hey, I actually feel way better.
Right. Yeah. That's super interesting here. Thank you for that. And also another question I had is, as you mentioned, you work with many franchises and athletes, different sports, you use a combination of, medical, psychiatric, behavioral diagnosis, and coaching. Can you just share any specific sleep strategies that helped them improve performance?
Well, so, I can't specifically talk about specific patients or specific teams
Right.
because HIPAA, but I can tell you, so we do, there are a couple of unique things that my practice does, right? So the first thing is that we do have this very comprehensive, it's called a bespoke sleep profiling, which is a book and a 21-day program in which we do assessments and actually have somebody do 10 nights of consecutive sleep studies to get a good objective baseline. And
Mm,
so what it does is it actually it's like a sleep physical. It's
right.
a vital sign that pre-season that athletes go through, which gives them tells us about what their baseline is. And then, as the season progresses, you can then, because you have a baseline to compare to, you can say, this is a little far from our baseline. So how do we get back on track? So there's that. But the other thing is that when I'm working with a team, I'm really working really closely with the performance staff as well as the
Right.
athletic trainers. And what that does is you can do sleep mapping. So you can map as to how somebody is sleeping and look at how it affects their performance. And then so that if you can help enhance their sleep, you can actually track how it helps enhance their performance. And that's really interesting and cool, because then that's a positive feedback loop, right? When you notice
Right.
that getting maybe a 15 minutes of sleep or taking a mid-afternoon nap actually enhances your performance, then that becomes a habit and you want to do more of it.
For sure. Yeah. That's very interesting to hear that positive feedback loop. And I'm just curious, like follow-up question. Do you think
Yeah.
people like at home can also do kind of like a sleep diary or, physical on their own and kind of do like some trial and error to like see what
Yes.
works best for them?
Right. And actually, a lot of people use consumer devices. Like if you use your Apple Watch,
For
or if you
sure.
use
Yeah.
like Whoop or Aura, and when you get that information, if you can look at trend information and look at, what time you went to bed, how much sleep you were getting, how regular you were, and then look at how you felt the next day, a and how you were performing,
Right.
and then use that information to make some good decisions, right, moving
Right.
forward. So you can, yeah, definitely can do that. And let me say something. You said something really interesting, which I think like teenagers should think about, because you don't always need an expensive device to tell you how you're sleeping, right?
Right.
So even keeping a diary
Yeah.
and just keeping track of really simple things. So like I would tell you, like if I was keeping a sleep diary, I would look at what time I made it to bed, what time
Hmm.
I woke up, which would give me, the time I was asleep. It would I would notice the difference in what time I go to sleep and wake up on a school night versus a weekend.
Definitely important. Yeah.
It would give me information about my regularity. I would also keep track of what are the things I do in that 1 hour before going to bed. Because for teenagers, if you're on your phone, if you're on social media, if you're chatting on whatever you guys chat on,
Yeah.
that is going to keep you awake more. I would recommend actually, what if you put that away and read an actual book, or even read some course book? I think that you'd find that you'd fall asleep easily or easier.
I agree. It might be a little tough for this generation, but I definitely agree with the advice.
Yeah, yeah. And then again, when you're setting goals for yourself, Ryan, they can be really small, simple, easy to follow goals. So if I tell somebody they're going to like get off your phone for the last 1 hour before your bedtime, it might be difficult, but could you do it for 15 minutes? Set an
Yeah.
alarm and say, okay, 15 minutes before my bedtime, which is about 11:30, I'm going to put away my phone. So do it for 15 minutes. I mean, and do that for about 2 weeks. I think that would be a resounding success.
Yeah, for sure.
You
I
know,
like
so
that
so
idea a lot.
so,
Yeah.
so do it in small micro steps.
Yeah, for sure. I like that. And maybe step it up a little after you get used to it.
Yes, yes.
Right.
And you can step it up by like 5 extra minutes.
Hmm.
So really small steps.
Yeah, I love that idea. For my next question, this is maybe for people who are aspiring to be, pro athletes or maybe in the world when they're older, or even I guess for a high school format when there is a lot of homework or extracurriculars.
Mhm.
How do people deal with, sleep disruptions due to maybe, as I said, homework or travel or, long flights, time zone changes? How does that affect their performance and I guess their mental?
Well, um, you know, I think that there I think it's a bi-directional relationship. What happens is that firstly, if you get less sleep, then you become more distractible and it takes you longer to do, let's say, homework or getting through with the work that you have to do. And of course, if the longer it takes you, the more it eats from your nighttime sleep,
Right.
right? So then it becomes this vicious cycle. And so I think that my recommendation is that it's always actually better to focus on if you think you're getting less sleep in increasing the time in bed by maybe 15 or 20 minutes only, and then see how it kind of helps you the next day in your performance. Like, does that mean that your performance becomes you become more efficient and your performance becomes you get things done in a timely manner? So I always think that you want to start out with the sleep aspect and getting a little bit more sleep.
Mhm.
I also think that if you know when teenagers are wired to be night owls, and they typically don't fall asleep till much significant later. And of course, your school starts too early, right? And
Right.
that's a huge problem. So perhaps maybe if there's a possibility of getting a short nap in the late afternoon, sometime before after school ends and before your evening activities help, that is also a useful tool. And when I mean short, I mean, anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes. So not a longer nap, but
Right.
just that would also be useful.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, I have a lot of friends that say they take very long naps after school. Is that counterproductive?
Yes, yes, it is counterproductive, right? So when you're falling, so typically what happens is that there's two separate processes that decide how sleepy or alert you're going to be during the day. So when you wake up in the morning, as the day progresses, your sleep drive accumulates. It's like pressure is building in a balloon. And
Right.
then when you fall asleep, you consume it, right? So there's your sleep drive, and then there's that circadian clock that I was just talking about, which is your timekeeping system, which it decides whether you're a night owl or if you're a morning person or if you're in
Hmm.
between. If you take a long nap during the day, unless you're an NBA player or an NHL, if you
Right.
take that long nap, then you consume and you take a large bite out of your sleep drive. So then it's going to be more difficult for you to fall asleep at night.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's why it's a good idea to restrict that nap time to 15 to 25 minutes. And 15 to 25 minutes, you still wake up from mostly light sleep, and you still have enough energy to keep going. So my recommendation is that unless you're in the NBA or the NHL, you should restrict those naps.
Right. It's good to hear. Good to know.
Yeah.
Um, and then another follow-up question I have is, I guess, how do you approach, sleep or sleep optimization, for athletes or students, maybe even dealing with maybe performance anxiety, or they have, pressure before a big event, big test, big game? Because,
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes they might find it difficult to sleep well, like the night before, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually that's a really important question. And the answer is really simple. So it's not unusual that if you have like an important test the next day or a competition the next day, that you're likely to sleep poorly. And some
Right.
people are prone to that versus others. Well, the best way to prepare for that is to consistently get good sleep, right? So if you consistently get good sleep, then that occasional night when you sleep poorly will not affect you that much because you
Okay.
build that resilience in your system. So So that is, and I will tell you that I always I tell athletes that if you develop good sleep habits and consistently you get good nights of sleep, then you can totally disregard that occasional night of poor sleep, because you'll be able to survive that, and the next day you'll go back to your normal sleep habits and sleep okay.
Right. So it's about the time preparing beforehand and kind of keeping that
Yes.
routine. That's very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good to know. Very interesting. Okay. And I guess you may mention, I mean, if you want to talk about a little more, maybe with technology or whatever, but what are like some simple sleep strategies for someone who maybe has a busy lifestyle, but they still have a little time to maybe optimize their rest without, compromising work or family commitments or other
Well,
activities?
so that's a good question. So let's divide that into categories, right? So the first thing is that you want to keep your bedroom cold and dark and technology free. Now, I
Yeah.
understand. So let's specifically for teenagers, it's difficult because you do have a phone right next to you. But if you can put your phone away 15 or 20 minutes before your actual bedtime, um, and then, you know, except for maybe a small nightlight, keep the bedroom cold and dark.
Hmm.
That does help with your sleep. The second thing is you have to be a little careful about caffeine intake,
Mm.
and like everything, including lip gloss and everything has caffeine in it. So you have to be a little careful about it. So caffeine, the energy drinks that teenagers drink, they also have caffeine in it.
Yeah.
And so you have to be, caffeine too close to your bedtime is going to make it more difficult for you to fall asleep. So it's going to make people go to bed later. But even if you do fall asleep, it's going to prevent you from going into the deeper, more stable stages of your sleep. So that's the other thing. The third thing is to, it's good to have dark at night, but it's also important to get exposure to nice bright light during the day. So
Right.
you want to make sure that you do that. And then the fourth thing is to kind of have a little bit balance in life. So during the day, in addition to working, getting some sort of exercise also helps in getting good sleep at night. So really, really simple things. Those are the
Yeah.
things I would recommend.
That does seem very, they all are very effective back driven, but they seem very simple to do, not
Yes.
just like small changes in your environment. I did have a quick follow-up question for the
Yes.
caffeine.
Mhm.
I know in my school, and I'm guessing it's universal, energy drinks and coffee is very common. It's
Yes.
drinking on a daily basis. What is your opinion, I guess, on different types of caffeine, maybe from an energy drink, from coffee, from something else? And is it just not something to avoid in general, or can it be, I guess, beneficial in any other way?
Well, so remember, caffeine is a very good performance enhancer.
Hmm.
So, but the problem is that I think that most teenagers are using a lot of caffeine because they're trying to compensate for the fact that they don't get enough sleep on a regular
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah.
You know, and it's difficult to. I think that people should read labels really well,
Yeah.
because you can take something that has maybe 100 or 75 grams of caffeine in it, or you can take something that comes in a energy drinks and it has 300 plus,
Right.
you know um, when it comes to caffeine. So you want to be careful about that. My recommendation is that teenagers should not be drinking any energy drinks, but I think that I might be speaking to deaf ears, as
Yeah,
I think it's really, really prevalent. And
for sure.
I do think that as adults, I think we do have to take some responsibility. I think it's wrong on our part that these drinks are so readily available to
Hmm.
the teenagers, and that there's not enough, checks and balances, so that they're
Right.
not readily available. Because even Starbucks has a huge amount of caffeine in it, and so it's unfortunate that it's so readily available.
Yeah, I completely agree. I see it very often on a
Yeah,
daily basis being drank, which is a shame.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, it is what it is, I guess. But hopefully it changes in the future.
yeah.
For my final question, I guess for the listeners that if you're listening, maybe you definitely have to be interested in sleep or maybe optimizing. So for listeners that may want to be, I guess, a sleep coach or go into the sleep field, do you find that
Mhm.
the field is growing and what type of career opportunities are there? Maybe for
Oh
people
my
out there
God,
who want to hear that.
I think it's such a growing field. And I think that there are positions open for multiple stakeholders, right? And I think, there are sleep physicians like I am who, because there are sleep disorders and
Hmm.
you want to make sure that you identify and treat those sleep disorders before, helping people to optimize sleep. But I think that at every stage and for, in the wellness industry, in high schools, in colleges, and just in working industries, I think it's really important to have coaches who are perhaps not, physicians or even PhDs, but who have a good understanding of the physiology of sleep so
Right.
that they can give these simple tips and they can educate people so that they can, if you think of the three pillars of health, it's sleep, nutrition, and exercise. We don't want to, we don't have enough sleep trained doctors and psychologists. So sleep coaches can easily help with that, carry that burden of educating and then perhaps coaching people into the correct behavior.
Right. Yeah. Super happy to hear that. It's a growing field and there's so many opportunities out there. That's great
Yeah,
to hear. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, those are all the questions I had for today. I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to come and talk about all the information you know, and I'm sure all the listeners are just as grateful as I am. I'll make sure to link any of your websites or links you would want me to link down below. And thank you again.
You're very welcome. Get more sleep.
Yep. Thank you for tuning into the REM Reward podcast. Before you go, we'd appreciate your support by subscribing, liking, and leaving your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for our next podcast where we will be joined by a special guest speaker to explore even more about the fascinating world of sleep and psychology.